I prefer to remain completely anonymous, since I'm one of the few people still involved in the traditional moonshine trade of the South. Believe it or not, it is still a thing. You just don't see as much of it as you used to. Law enforcement tends to turn a blind eye these days, and a big part of the draw of the whole thing was making money off something you weren't supposed to be doing. But anyway, this story happened when I was barely 13, and the law had hauled away enough of the family to make a good dent in our moonshining. Living in the mountains just wasn't protecting us like we had hoped. So, the older guys decided it was time to teach me what they knew, so that I could step up and help out with the family business. Worst case scenario, I know how to make money if I ever ended up by myself and keep me and my siblings fed. They showed me how to rig up a moonshine, still out of anything, including old car parts. They showed me how to grow the grain and make it into a mash. I supposed back in the day, I got the equivalent of a college education from those old kinfolk. But in the process, the old family tale took on a whole new dimension of reality. They emphasized that if there was anything that I should not let slide, it was leaving out some fresh moonshine for Tall Charlie. And it better be fresh. If it's more than 12 hours old, he wouldn't have it. And the drink had to be offered on the old Signal Hill, on the petrified tree stump, on the night of each new moon. All of my life, I had heard my family saying things like, "Buy Tall Charlie's whiskers," and "Charlie take you," and other superstitious sounding stuff. I think the best one was giving someone a Charlie gift, something you gave to the wife when she was mad at you. I just went with the flow, being surrounded by that talk all my life. I guess I filled Tall Charlie away in some pigeonholes as Santa Claus. But there's all the old men in the family standing over me, with crazy wide eyes, telling me how important it is to leave out a fresh nip for Tall Charlie. Part of me just couldn't take them seriously. I think they picked up on it, and they grew stern with me for days. I heard Charlie's name so many times. It's a wonder my ears did not bleed. So I humored them. I got into the full swing of making liquor, and I was the first to make sure that Tall Charlie got his share. I personally took it to the old Signal Hill myself. I won't lie. The place had a funny way about it at night, during a new moon, when you couldn't see a thing. About a year went by of me doing all this, and by the time I was 14, I was asking some rational questions. Each time I went up to the Signal Hill with a new drink, the old one was gone, unless there was a bear or raccoon that liked getting sauced. It was the work of some living person for sure. One new moon, I decided it was time to bring some food and something to sleep on, 'cause I wanted to see which one of my family, or whoever, was making the trip to get a little bit of moonshine from the Signal Hill. It had to have been family. I thought all that witchy offerings and sacrifices were done during full moons. Why the new moon, when you have a slim chance of being seen and identified? It was just too convenient. So, I set down the offering on the stump, and I hid back behind the big old fallen tree, and I covered up my lantern so I wasn't this obvious blob of light. I started to doze when I heard movement. I uncovered the lantern and sprang out into the open like I was going to arrest somebody. I really should have been more cautious. There was a figure leaning over to take the drink. That had to have been the tallest outline of a person I had ever seen in my life. And that was all I could see, an outline. The body of the thing seemed to absorb light, making it a shadow. My lantern lit up most things around it, but not the person itself. There were 2 points of light, like pearl marbles, and they gazed through me as it turned its head to see who was interrupting its moment with the drink. Then, there were other points of light when it showed its teeth. I supposed it could have been a smile. Felt more like a territorial snarl. I didn't stick around to find out. I cut out of there pretty quickly, and I'm pretty sure I pissed down my leg while I was running away. So I don't travel too far from my homestead. I've lived close all my life to make sure Charlie gets his drinks on time, every time. I'm a professional landscape photographer, and about 2-3 years ago, during the winter months, I was out in the state of Colorado, higher up in the mountains, shooting some shots, and traveling on different locations to find the best shots to get. This happened when I was traveling to a destination in the mountains. I was going up a rather large hillside when I discovered, to my right, were 2 large, upright, tall, and black humans, or humanoid persons, carrying a large dead buck. There was one in front, who had its front legs, and one in back, carrying its back legs. It was most certainly dead, and unfortunately, my camera and my tripod were all put away and in my backpack. They were gone in just a matter of a few seconds, faster than I would ever have time to pull out my camera and get a good shot. Not to mention, these figures were also several hundred yards away, enough that I could see that they were persons. But there's 2 main reasons why I suspect they were not humans, and something else. My speculation being Bigfoot. Number 1, I'm up here in a very remote, desolate area in the mountains. There shouldn't really be people around, and it wasn't hunting season that I was aware of. Number 2, they moved very fast, and even from my distance, they were all black, like pitch black. Plus, their size in comparison to the dead buck, which I could see from my distance was rather large, something did not seem right. And I think that was my very first time ever seeing Bigfoot up here in the Rockies. I live in a corner of the mountains of West Virginia that the world seems to have forgotten about. I don't know if they did that on purpose, or if they just haven't sent enough people out here to truly document things. I found out the hard way that you are lucky to be alive if you come out here and you don't know what you are getting yourself into. I'm lucky to be alive myself. My story started when I was 17, and I was just about as wild as any boy could be. You couldn't exactly go to a bar to find fresh meat to grill for the night, but there were plenty of young girls among our so-called God-fearing families that were just as wild as I was. You just had to know how to meet them when their parents weren't around, and yours weren't around at the same time. At the time, I had met the wildest little mountain flower I have ever laid eyes on, and she seemed to think just as highly of me. Her eyes kind of turned black when she looked at me. We didn't waste any time in figuring out when she and I could spend some solo time alone. Her paw must have caught wind that she was falling for a loose boy, 'cause she was set that she had to come to me, and it wouldn't be good if I came to her. I lived with my grandparents, who were well on their own way to being blind and deaf, so I had made it. She and I, in our time together, as much as we pleased in a treehouse I built. Nobody knew about the place except me and the girls that I took there. You can only do so much boinking there before you're interested in really talking. I didn't have any interesting stories for her, besides the fact that I'd been forbidden all my life from playing around what Grandma called the sandy part of the mountains. Even as a young adult, I got told pretty regular that I should not go there. She was a daredevil and wanted to see the sandy parts. I was surprised at how afraid I was to actually overstep that boundary. I never had. I could overstep all kinds of bounds with girls, but not going to the sandy parts. So I sucked it up, and I agreed that we'd go the next time we were together. The sandy parts weren't all that sandy. They were just rough, and not much grew there. Lots of gravel rock in the soil that only hardy, scrubby plants could handle. It also seemed unusually dry, though the rain fell there as much as it did anywhere else. I was watching a fox looking for bugs, thinking about how foolish I must have looked, being so spooked by an arbitrary rule my elders came up with. I had not seen a single thing to watch out for. My girl called me over to look at something around a bunch of half-buried boulders. There were two things she was checking out. There were deep scratch marks in the boulders, the kind that are made by hours of scraping. There were also what looked to be recent bloodstains, but it was also dried, so it was that rusty color. I was able to convince myself that it was something else. I heard a painful yelp over yonder, and we went to see what it was. There wasn't much left of the fox that I saw earlier. The tail was a bloody stump, and shreds of skin had been flung everywhere, sticking to the faces of the rocks. Bad as that was, it bothered me even more how quickly that had taken place. I eyeballed the ground for footprints, but nothing. I was pretty well spooked, but my girl was more fascinated than anything else. She starts babbling about going on a whole monster hunting expedition to see what was lurking in the sandy parts. Something about her, the way it made me afraid, and I wanted her to get to safety. That just made her mad, like she was a wild bird resisting being caged. I wondered if that's how her parents felt when they found out about me. All of a sudden, we were having a pretty bad argument over the entire thing. That's when I made the biggest mistake that I could have made. I stomped off in anger and left her there. I wasn't gone long. I sat under a tree for about 30 minutes, somehow accidentally dozing off. I came to and noticed that she had not found me. I went back over to the sandy parts, and that's pretty much where my life ended in a very real way. Remember what I said about the fox? It was the same with my girl. Her blonde hair was flung every which way, human bones picked clean, strewn all over like garbage. The prettiest girl I'd ever knew was treated like litter. I was hot, let me tell you, and I made revenge a personal matter. I hung out alone in the sandy parts, waiting for whoever or whatever was there, and I had my hatchet ready every waking minute. But the murderer never showed. Once, and only once, I thought I saw something like a long insect leg poking out from a rock, as if the rock were some sort of shell, and that leg was longer than a cat's tail. I looked that rock over, tried even smashing it, but nothing. I never found out what was killing and eating when I wasn't watching. I did the right thing and got the police involved, and no matter how bad I looked, miraculously, they didn't put me away for it. Part of me wanted them to, but they did not have enough to pin it on me. That was either the most honest set of cops in the world, or another degree of cruelty on the part of the thing that would kill and eat everybody but me. like its will extended to leaving me with the worst possible guilt. So, there you have it. If you find yourself in the mountains where it's all dry and rocky, and animals are disappearing, do yourself a favor and leave while you still can. My story takes place back in 2012 when I hiked Camelback Mountain in Arizona. During this day, it was pretty dead, and Camelback Mountain is usually pretty full of people. You're not far from civilization, so it's not like you're out in the boondocks. It's a pretty well-traveled area. I just think this day, I was the only person on this section of trail that I could see behind me and ahead of me. If you don't know what the trail is like, it's not dirt or surrounded by trees. It's pretty much a straight rocky path up. Boulders and rocks everywhere, with all sorts of mountain Arizona brush around. At one point or another, I was starting to feel a very eerie sensation, like I should just turn around and leave. Unsure of why I was feeling that, I subsided my feelings, and just paid no attention, paid no mind to such ridiculous feelings. I wasn't about to turn back, until, directly ahead of me, I saw the largest coyote crouching behind some brush, and it appeared to be watching me. I instantly knew it was a coyote, due to its coloring and shape of face. I mean, if you know what a coyote looks like, then you know. Except, even from the distance it was at, I could tell it was much larger than any regular coyote. That's when I kept walking toward it, not thinking too much, and just thinking how weird it was, when all of a sudden, this coyote stood up, as if to stop me from coming toward it. And then, when it stood up, all hell in my mind broke loose. When I say it stood up, I mean just like a person. 2 legs. And I saw that its body was just like that of a hairy man. Chest, arms, legs, everything about it besides the head was human, but covered in fur that resembled a coyote's fur. Because of the brush and rocks, I couldn't really see any hands or feet, but it was enough for me to know that this was something of another world, potentially a shapeshifter or skinwalker, like I've heard about in tales before. But I thought that was only a Navajo thing, or a Native American thing. This all happened in my mind within a few seconds of seeing this thing. That's when I turned around, and I fled down the trail. It never followed me, but it's a reason why I don't go back and hike on Camelback Mountain anymore. Now that so many years have passed, and I've got to expand upon my knowledge of the area and things of the area, I truly believe it was somebody, a native, I think, who was wearing a coyote skin and had the ability to take its shape and form, or a shapeshifter, as you call it. That's what I believe. The coyote, or person, even though when it fully stood up, wasn't any more taller than I, and I'm 6 foot even, and even I can tell you when it stood up on 2 legs, it was a threatening posture, like it was getting ready to meet me face to face, like it felt threatened, and not like it was going to run off. Why this person, or thing, or coyote, was crouched down behind the brush watching me, I'm not sure. It's possible it had been there for a while, and I had just come on that side of the trail, and this thing saw me coming, and then I saw it, and it didn't know what to do. So many possibilities. But to be honest with you, I don't have an answer at all. I'm just merely guessing. But what I know for sure is I encountered something on that day. Something that wasn't entirely human. I was in the Rockies, working as a consensus man, of all things. You'd be amazed at the theories and misconceptions people have about me and what I do in my line of work. I'm a government spy, I'm a criminal, posing as a government employee. I'm actually counting people on behalf of the USSR, instead of the US, and so on. So I was a little more than dog food with legs, as far as the mountain people were concerned. I had one house to go, and then I could get out of those godforsaken mountains. I prayed that they were home, halfway friendly, and didn't have large dogs. As far as mountain homes went, it was something of a mansion, just a very rustic one. Also, the property seemed to be sprawling. I felt like I had stumbled onto the land of one of the oldest and biggest families in the mountains. Knocking on the imposing front door got me nothing but silence. I made it a point to knock loudly, just in case there was a dog on the property, and he would give himself away, barking at the disturbance. There was no such reaction. Mountain people weren't known for vacating their homes of anyone and everyone at once, so I wondered if the place was even still lived in. It did not have the abandoned feel to it. There was a truck that looked like it had been in use recently. There was clean laundry out on the clothesline. So where was everybody? I grew bolder, and I went out to the nearest open structure I could see. The barn. It was so old that most of the red paint had flaked off. It was generously stashed with hay bales, the ceiling high, to the point that it felt like a cathedral instead of a barn. The strange feeling was growing stronger, and I felt like I was being watched. I had been looking up so much that I didn't notice the obvious pile of bones in the center of the barn floor. There were human skulls glaring at me, so no amount of rationalization would protect me from the fact that people did die here, unnaturally. Even worse, there were still spots of moist pink on the bones, this being all recent work, and no police tape anywhere. I wasn't going to find a phone out there, so I did the next best thing. I took out my old company camera and began taking pictures with the film I had left. I don't know what made me glance up, but I saw something pale and large clinging to the corner where the wall and ceiling met. It had long fingers and toes like that of a frog. Its vertebrae poked from underneath its taut skin. It was hunched, also like a frog, but I could tell that everything about it was long and tall. It could have been a trick of the shadows, but it looked like it didn't have much of a face, other than 3 black eyes arranged in a pyramid formation. There was nothing to indicate a mouth or nose. I reacted on instinct, and I ran. I felt the impact of the creature in my feet as it leapt down from its perch. I could tell that it was closing in on me with blinding speed. I suppose there's a 1 in a million chance of surviving anything, and the odds decided to be in my favor that day. I could hear it behind me, gaining quickly. I timed it in my head when I guesstimated that it would make the killing pounce. I dove at a perpendicular angle to the truck I had passed before. It shouldn't have worked, but the monster kissed the grill of the truck full force. I glanced over my shoulder to see its shape slump off to the side. It was stunned at least, and I prayed that was enough time for me to make it to my own vehicle. My lungs were burning, and my out-of-shape body was begging for me to stop running. I almost gave in when I heard the scampering of the creature behind me again. It was closing in faster this time, and it must have been furious. The instant that I had shut my car door and locked it, the creature had thrown its body against the window. I was arrested for a moment by the bottomlessness of those black eyes. That was the first time I noticed that there weren't any eyes in those 3 sockets. They were just empty holes that extended into a darkness that was deeper than the head they sat in. They were as expressionless as the eyes of human skulls, and yet I could feel the boiling rage they seethed. I snapped out of it, jumped over to lock the other doors. No electronic locks. The monster was half a second behind me as it tried each door. Then, it resorted to slapping the glass. I started my car and tried to lunge backwards and run over it, but it was too fast for that. The cab of my car thumped, and my heart pounded so hard that I thought I'd have a concussion from it. The monster was on top of my car. I had visions of the thing clinging to either the top or the bottom of my vehicle, all the way into town, and then finally snapping my neck as soon as I dared to step out of it. I peeled out and looked in my rearview mirror. Nothing. It was still with me. I drove into the nearest town, found the police station, and began honking my horn like crazy. Several officers came out looking confused and annoyed. I put them through the business of checking my vehicle for anything unusual. They thought they were looking for drugs. My heightened state convinced them that I was on something, but they couldn't find anything above or below, so I gradually accepted the idea that the monster had given up at some point. I handed over the camera with its pictures of the carnage at the mountain home. I was never able to find out how far they pursued the case. Even today, I still think I see the thing out of the corner of my eye, still stalking me. If it really is still with me, I wonder what it's waiting for. Maybe it's being cruel, and it wants to scare me to death. Maybe I'm mentally scarred, and I'm cursed with hallucinations and jumping at shadows. Either way, what I saw was real. What it did to that family was more than real. This was only back in 2019, and when I still think about it, it still scares me. So even writing this is kind of tough. I just would rather forget about it. But I suppose it's best to at least send it to somebody that can use it to help other people who have dealt with similar things. Back in 2019, as I said, I was out camping with my family and several very close friends. Near our campsite, well, not even a campsite, we were kind of out in the woods, so not anywhere at a campground. Back where we were, we had a nice little spot, a clearing, I guess you would call it. Well, come evening time, we saw several deer come through the area. No bucks, just a bunch of doe, blacktail to be exact. Right around sundown, we saw a couple more doe come in. We weren't really paying any attention to them, since we're used to seeing deer all the time where we live, but they are beautiful to look at. After they left the clearing into the woods, we heard a huge giant roar that sounded like a lion, but 20 times bigger and more ferocious, and then crashing in the woods, away from our campsite, as if something was running after those doe. All of my friends and my family, we all heard it, and we were all pale and wide-eyed for the rest of the night, thinking, what on earth did we just hear? A few of my friends suggested it was probably just a mountain lion, and the distortion of being outside made it sound much bigger than it actually was. Except I'm no fool. There's no way a mountain lion could sound like that. And there's no way a mountain lion would go crashing through the trees. They're a silent killer, or at least they try to be. This sounded like a bulldozer pillaging through the woods. I mean, you could visibly hear trees and branches snapping and breaking. Whatever was going after those doe had to have been massive and very fast, because it led away from that clearing very quickly. I'm pretty glad we never actually had to see what it looked like.